Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. I am going to be talking about critical race theory, CRT. And of course, my name is Kalela Williams. I'm Black History Maven. Welcome to this online program. So I'm going to talk about the history of critical race theory, why it's so talked about right now. And then you will, those of you who've signed up on Eventbrite will be able to access a Zoom a Zoom link for a book talk, and we'll be talking about Antiracist Baby by Ibram Kendi. So if you haven't signed up on Eventbrite, do so, because that will give you the Zoom link to our book talk. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with again talking about critical race theory. This won't take very long. This should take about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll pivot over to Zoom for a book discussion. Feel free to chime in via chat and engage. And so first, let's go ahead and ask the question, what is critical race theory? Now you can see here, I've got my, my face was in the way, so I'm just gonna go ahead and move it. What is critical race theory? Is it an equality movement? Is it an academic concept, a policy initiative, or a diversity program? Feel free, if you're chiming in on, if you're online, feel free to chime in via chat and tell us what you think it is, whether it's A, B, C, or D. And I'll just wait a minute to see if anybody chimes in before I give the answer. Well, instead of giving the answer right away, I'll go ahead and talk it through as we move through our broadcast, and we'll find out whether or not critical race theory is A, an equality movement, B, an academic concept, C, a policy initiative, or D, a diversity program. All right, so it looks like we've got someone who's chimed in with B. And Wade, that is actually the correct answer. It is indeed an academic concept. And good point. I want to go ahead and address these ideas of legacies later on in the broadcast. And I'm going to go ahead and show that Wade picked B. So there we are. All right. So moving forward. Now go ahead and all right. So critical race theory is widely credited to the coin is credited to Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, and she is a law professor at UCLA School of Law and Columbia Law School. Recently, the New York Times asked her for a definition, and she first raised a question of her own. Why is this coming up now? Because indeed it is coming up a lot now, and we're going to talk about why it's so talked about now. So she did also go forward to say it is a way of seeing, attending to, accounting for, tracing, and analyzing the ways that race is produced, the ways that racial inequality is facilitated, and the ways that our history has created these inequalities that can now almost effortlessly be reproduced unless we attend to the existence of these inequalities. So again, I want to just emphasize that can almost be effortlessly reproduced unless we attend to the existence of these inequalities. And again, this is the person who's coined with this phrase. CRT studies what race is, how racism came about, and it asks, how are people treated differently due to race? What is the history behind racism? What is its impact today? Now, if we follow this concept, we believe that inequality and discrimination can easily happen unless our society pays careful attention. This means inequality will happen unless the people and groups making decisions for many of us, like those who run our governments and school boards and hospitals, do their best to recognize and stop racism, even in small ways. So that's sort of a paraphrase of Kimberly Crenshaw's definition of the way that she described it. Now, Derek Bell is called the pioneer behind critical race theory. He was a legal scholar and the first tenured Black professor at Harvard Law School, and later one of the first Black deans of a law school that was historically white. He actually was noted for his not just the extensive work that he did in pioneering critical race theory, but he was also known for walking the walk. And sometimes that meant walking away. While he was working for the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department in his 20s, his superiors told him that his membership in the NAACP was problematic. And so they said it posed a conflict of interest. And so he's like, okay, I'll quit the department. He didn't quit the NAACP, he quit the department. 30 years later, in 1980, he left Harvard Law School in protest of them not hiring more tenured Black professors. Students, in turn, protested for the same reasons. And among those protesters was Kimberly Crenshaw Williams, or Kimberly Williams Crenshaw. Derrick Bell returned to Harvard in 1986, but he staged a 5-day sit-in to protest the school not granting tenure to 2 professors whose work involved CRT. A few years later, he took an unpaid leave of absence in protest that the school hadn't yet hired a Black woman for its tenured faculty. This return to Harvard was after resigning from the University of Oregon in 1985, which he did in protest of the school not offering a position to an Asian American woman. So these are his credentials right here. We can see that we can see the work that he did, but also the work that he left in protest. Now, he put forth a body of legal scholarship that explored how racism is embedded in laws and legal institutions, even many of those institutions that are intended to redress past injustices. His 1973 book became a staple in law schools and is now in its 6th edition. Kimberly Crenshaw, back to her. In 1989, she organized a workshop that questioned how, despite civil rights legislation of the 1950s and 1960s, how racial inequality still persisted. The ideas that she and other participants established became another foundation in the new academic framework called critical race theory. So, again, just asking, we've got a little bit of history around critical race theory, but what are some of its tenets? So some of the tenets of critical race theory are a few things here, and I'm going to go ahead and remove my picture so that we can see the whole thing. All right, so some of the tenets of critical race theory: understanding that systems and institutions, not individual people, are a primary concern. Rejection of the existence of a colorblind society while upholding that race is a social construct. Some people have a hard time balancing this. They don't understand how you can do both. Acknowledging that those with good intentions can still enforce racial hierarchies. A few more. Arguing that slavery, Jim Crow laws, and other legal forms of discrimination still create an unequal playing field. And sometimes CRT is used as a catch-all for any equality initiative, including affirmative action and wokeness in general. However that is defined, everyone seems to define it differently. Considerations. Not everybody agrees on everything about critical race theory, just like any other academic theory. It's very hard to find an academic theory that everyone agrees with. Academics and scholars are notoriously opinionated and have, and when I say opinionated, we hope that they have fact-based opinions, but they tend to not go along to get along all the time. And of course, CRT is a more complicated study that generally isn't taught in schools, but some teachers might consider cause and effect, historical cause and effect, because that there was discrimination might mean that this might have happened as a result, or that might have happened as a result. Now, academic critics have of critical race theory, they've asked, has scholarly rigor been thrown away in favor of people's personal stories? In other words, have we sort of abandoned the academic rigor that we normally might have in order to to uphold people's personal stories and anecdotes? Or does a focus on systemic issues diminish the experience of individual people? So there are these two different things. There's the scholarly rigor in favor of people's personal stories. Are we telling too many personal stories? Or are we not telling enough personal stories? Now, some critics of CRT also say, and these are not necessarily academics; these are just people. That some critics might say, well, it's not a system that's the problem. It's individual bigots. It's racist people going around spewing their racism everywhere, being very obvious about it and screaming at people. That's not in a whole institution. How could an institution practice racism? I don't understand. So that's one comment that we hear. Another is we shouldn't talk about this at all. Discussing racism is divisive, and it results in shaming and accusations against white people. So let's just not talk about it. Again, these are some critics. Parents who are hearing about this in the news, now again, want to emphasize that critical race theory generally isn't taught in K through 12 schools, but right now there's the idea that it is. So parents are afraid that teachers are teaching this scholarship. But some parents also think that children shouldn't learn about race or racism in schools at all, that that's not something that's appropriate for a school classroom. Some parents feel that it's making kids uncomfortable, that it makes kids feel bad, and we shouldn't make kids feel bad or feel uncomfortable when they learn about history. And other parents, of course, feel like schools shouldn't talk about it, parents should talk about it. It shouldn't be something that kids that kids hear at school. Recently, critical race theory became a big issue in Virginia during the gubernatorial elections. This was this past November. And of course, we've got this quote from Glenn Youngkin. I'll give you a minute to read it. And to emphasize that he says we have to teach all history, sure, yeah. But to actually teach our children that one group is advantaged and the other disadvantaged simply because of the color of their skin cuts across everything we know to be true. I'm going to say that again. To teach that one group is advantaged and the other is disadvantaged simply because of the color of their skin cuts across everything we know to be true. So I'm reading that as, well, racism doesn't really exist because you can't be disadvantaged due to the color of your skin. That's how I'm reading it. Now, that is very inconsistent with my own experience. This is a bit of a longer piece here, but I think it's important to talk about, again, as we think about why critical race theory is such a big thing now and is part of our commentary so much right now. We can look at a conservative activist named Chris Rufo, who cited that we've needed a new language for these issues. He expressed some concern with political correctness, that doesn't capture people's imaginations anymore. He said we need another frame. The other frames are wrong too. Cancel culture is a vacuous term and doesn't translate into a political program. Woke is a good epithet, but it's too broad, too terminal, and too easily brushed aside. Critical race theory is the perfect villain. So this was a statement that was made, I believe it was in 2020, but in early 2020 by Chris Rufo. I'm going to give you a few minutes more to read this here. All right. So moving forward here, another conversation with Chris Rufo. Conservatives need to wake up. This is an existential threat to the United States, and the bureaucracy, even under Trump, is being weaponized against core American values. And I'd like to make it explicit. It's within their authority to immediately issue a an executive order to abolish critical race theory training from the federal government. And I call on the president to immediately issue this executive order to stamp out this destructive, divisive, and pseudoscientific ideology. Bob Skiba has said, thank you for your comment here. He said that Glenn Youngkin has even set up a hotline to report teachers who teach CRT. That is indeed true, Bob. And that's part of, we're seeing that a lot. We're seeing this sort of vigilante encouragement with a lot of issues, with certainly with critical race theory. We see that in Florida as well with the Don't Say Gay bill, the so-called Don't Say Gay bill, where it's so insidious that not only can you report teachers, but you also parents are and people who caregivers of LGBTQ kids um, can be can be can be threatened with having their kids taken away, because people can report them for providing care to their children. And this is especially affecting the parents and caregivers of trans kids, and of course the trans kids themselves who want the care, who need um, who have unique needs, and parents and caregivers and teachers can actually get into legal trouble. So this is again this part of this like vigilante. What I feel is somewhat. I feel it's violence myself, but that's how I feel. So moving forward, the other part that we're missing here with all of this talk about critical race theory is, we keep hearing our children, our children, our children, but who is our children? Who is our children? Who is our children? Whose children is Glenn Youngkin talking about when he talks about our children? And there are some people like Karen Noir, Lenoir, I'm sorry, who says, I don't remember when I wasn't experiencing racism. Um, I mean, kids learn this just by Black kids and brown kids and Asian kids are going to learn this just by existing. They don't need, they're going to learn about racism just by going to school and being around other people. So there's that frustration that you're not talking about our kids. Um, you're not talking about everybody's kids when you say our kids. So, of course, critical race theory has gone to the forefront again with the recent hearings of Ketanji Brown Jackson, the absolutely, to me, baffling hearings involving conversations with Ted Cruz and others. Of course, oh, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm going to go ahead and end this presentation, this part of the presentation, and did a little bit of an experiment with including a Zoom link to a book discussion in just a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to post that in the chat here. And then I will immediately delete it because just in case there's any, one of the reasons I tried to do this is because I wanted to avoid Zoom bombs. So I will go ahead and post this link in the chat and then I'll delete it very shortly thereafter. But join me on Zoom. If you've already got the link, you can go ahead and chime in and go in now. Yeah, so let's just add this here. And again, if you've, we're going to go ahead and end this portion of the conversation. If you've already got the link, go ahead and join me on Zoom. And if you don't, I'm putting it right here. Okay. So you can see the information here in the chat. Again, you can go ahead and chime in on Zoom if you'd like to discuss Antiracist Baby, this book that Ted Cruz is holding up for us right here. And you can also, we'll also be discussing a poem by Kwame Alexander. So again, this is a sort of different way of doing things. Feel free to chime on into Zoom and we'll see. For those of you who joined me for this live broadcast and who won't be joining for the book discussion, I appreciate your time and I hope you've learned a little something about critical race theory. I look forward to any comments or questions that you might have. Please feel free to send me an email. And you can also check me on my website, blackhistorymaven.com. All right, I will see you all in the Zoom chat. And again, those of you who signed in through Eventbrite, you should have received an email with the Zoom link, and it's also appearing here as part of the chat. So again, won't let me click on. Okay. If you're having issues, if you want to, just send me an email at blackhistorymaven. If you send me an email, I'll go ahead and make sure that you get that full link here. I'm not sure what's going on here, but we'll fix it. So thank you all again, and shoot me an email if you're running into any difficulty, and I will see you on Zoom in just a minute. Thanks. All right, everyone. Bye-bye.